In this video, we're diving headfirst into one of the most personal revenge plots in UK gangland history. Frankie Sinclair wasn't just another name on the Cardiff streets. He was a man with rules. But when masked gunmen sprayed his mother's house with bullets and crossbow bolts, those rules went out the window. What followed was cold, calculated retribution, encrypted murder plots, paid shooters, and an Encrochat hit list. And at the center of it all was a James Bond pistol, a London arms broker, and a plan to whack a rival without leaving a trace. But the digital underworld had already been cracked, and Sinclair never saw it coming. It was just after sunset, on a quiet residential street in Cardiff, late March 2020. The last of the daylight had faded, and most of the neighbors were settling in for the night. But at one house, everything was about to change. A van crept down the road, engine low, its headlights off. Inside were three masked men, locked and loaded, ready to spray the house. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. They stepped out, approached the front of the house, and opened fire. Windows shattered. The front door splintered. The silence of the street was broken by violence that had no warning. Inside, a mother dropped to the floor as gunfire tore through her home. The attackers disappeared just as quickly as they came, leaving behind chaos, fear, and a message. This wasn't just a random shooting. This was personal. The house belonged to the mother of Frankie Sinclair, a well-known figure in Cardiff's underworld. And in that world, going after someone's mum wasn't business. It was disrespect. And for Frankie Sinclair, it meant one thing: revenge. Frankie's name had cropped up in plenty of major investigations in South Wales. Detectives didn't always have evidence, but his shadow was there. He was what officers called a facilitator. If something was happening on the street, Frankie either knew about it or had made it happen. He'd already stacked up 43 convictions for 95 offenses. But the image he put out wasn't of a career criminal stashing cash out of sight. He was flash, high-end cars, expensive clothes and designer watches. To the younger kids on the estate, he looked like everything the streets promised. Television-style criminal glamour, but in real life. Police had tried for years to pin something solid on him, but the trail always slipped. There were whispers, suspicions, never enough, until March 2020. That's when everything changed. The van had pulled up outside his mother's home in the Tremorfa area of Cardiff. The three men were armed with various weapons. One carried a crossbow, another had a handgun, the third man, a sawn-off shotgun. Nobody called the police. When they eventually found out and started the investigation, they were met with a wall of silence. No neighbors could say for sure what they'd heard. When officers arrived, the house itself had a brand new window. Frankie and his mum said nothing had happened. There was no complaint, no statement, and no cooperation. But detectives knew what the attack meant. It was retaliation. A message sent by rivals in a gang war that was beginning to boil. And in the rules of that world, going after someone's mum wasn't business. It was personal. It was war. That was the night something snapped, because whatever line Frankie Sinclair played on before, from that moment, it vanished. An innocent family had been targeted, and in the code of the street, some lines still weren't meant to be crossed. By 2020, the capital of Wales was fractured by turf disputes and shifting alliances in its local drug trade. And in the middle of it all was a man police called Frankie the Facilitator. Frankie Sinclair's name wasn't always at the top of intelligence reports, But it came up everywhere: drugs, stolen cars, violence, handling stolen goods. He wasn't the man with the gun. He was the man who knew who had one. To some, he was a connector. To others, a problem solver. But to police, he was always just outside the frame. He wasn't the only name on the streets. There were others moving weight and enforcing turf. One of them was Kairon Hassan. In December 2020, Hassan and his cousin were convicted of a vicious attempted murder in Rumney, an ambush outside a corner shop involving a sawn-off shotgun and a machete. The victims survived. But the message was clear: disputes were no longer being settled with fists. According to evidence presented later in court, Sinclair and Hassan were locked in an escalating feud. The specifics remain murky: drugs, territory, respect, maybe all three. But what's clear is that something tipped the balance in March of that year. That was the month that the home of Sinclair's mother was attacked. Someone sent that message, and someone wanted it heard. During the later trial at the Old Bailey, the prosecution alleged that Sinclair believed Hassan was responsible. The messages recovered from Sinclair's Encrochat device suggested a man humiliated, under pressure, and out for blood. He told one contact, "Mum's got lit up, so retaliation can't be no joke." There was no more talk of ego or face. This was about restoring dominance, sending a message louder than the one he'd just received. The Cardiff feud had crossed a line, and now Sinclair was looking for firepower, and he knew exactly where to find it. When Frankie Sinclair made the decision to retaliate, he didn't go local. He went straight to London, to a man known in encrypted circles as Usual Wolf. His real name was Paul Fontaine, a 36-year-old from Hackney. On paper, Fontaine looked like a low-level operator, described in court as a street dealer, still living at home with his father. But on Encrochat, he played a different role: middleman, weapons supplier, fixer, guns, drugs, counterfeit notes. Fontaine knew how to source and move them. Sinclair messaged him under the handle Nude Train. He didn't mince his words. In one exchange, he wrote, "I need 2 savages." Fontaine didn't ask questions. He responded with options, prices, contacts. In the underworld economy, everything has a rate. The going rate for a hit. One message reads, 30,000 per body. Or you provide the tools, 20,000. Sinclair wanted something precise, a Walther PPK, the same gun made famous by James Bond. He called it My James Bond Ting. Fontaine tried to help him get it, but the first batch of ammunition didn't fit. Sinclair messaged back, wrong size, attaching a photo of the pistol. Eventually, Fontaine sourced a Colt revolver with matching rounds. Payment was arranged down to the last bullet, £370 for 37 rounds. The planning was clinical. No shouting, no slang-laced bravado, just logistics. And all of it was happening through Encrochat, a system they believed was impenetrable. Devices that looked like regular Android phones, but booted into a hidden operating system. Burn times could be set for messages to delete automatically. Panic wipes could erase everything in seconds. It was marketed like a security system, but sold like a weapon. To Sinclair and Fontaine, this wasn't just communication. It was insulation, distance. They thought they were untouchable. But what they didn't know was that someone was already watching. By early April 2020, the planning was no longer theoretical. Frankie Sinclair had the motive. Paul Fontaine had the connections. And through Encrochat, the two men built a plot, one message at a time. The intended target, according to prosecution claims, was Kairon Hassan, a rival gangster. allegedly linked to the earlier attack on Sinclair's mother's home. The goal: take him out permanently. Sinclair didn't hold back in his phrasing. "He want to duppy," Fontaine wrote to a contact. In street slang, duppy means to ghost someone, to kill. The contact, going by the name Chestbridge, was blunt: 30,000 per body, all in. Or you provide the tools, and 20K. Sinclair had already acquired the Walther PPK, but swapped it for the Colt revolver. All of this was happening in real time on Encro. To Sinclair and Fontaine, it was just business, clinical, precise, and detached. But to the police, who were silently watching every message through a hacked network, it was enough to map out a murder before it happened. A hit, arranged on a device that was sold as secure. A murder plot, built-in messages that read more like invoices than threats. The guns were real, the target was named, and now the plan seemed to be in motion. But the police couldn't just wait for the trigger to be pulled. What Frankie Sinclair and Paul Fontaine didn't know was that their messages, every photo, every plan, were already with the cops. Through a brief but devastating breach of the Encrochat network, law enforcement agencies across Europe were suddenly inside thousands of supposedly secure devices. In the UK, it was called Operation Venetic, a once-in-a-generation surveillance effort that left entire criminal networks exposed. By the time Sinclair sent photos of his Walther PPK and tried to source ammunition, officers were already watching. When Fontaine discussed prices, quantities, and contacts, investigators were copying every word. The data didn't just show conversations, it linked locations, phones, photos, and even room interiors. One of the images Sinclair sent, casually, included a background that police later matched to a room inside his home. In another, his dog, a French bulldog, appeared on camera, sealing the match. As the evidence piled up, the decision was made. Armed teams moved in. In Cardiff, Sinclair was arrested at home. His encrypted device was seized. A quiet figure in local investigations for years, he had finally been caught. Not in a car chase, not with a gun in hand, but with words he thought no one else could read. In Hackney, police surrounded Paul Fontaine's address. Inside, they recovered multiple encrypted phones and further evidence linking him to the communications as Usual Wolf. The bust wasn't just about one planned hit. It was about a system that let criminal plots play out like emails, and the quiet, steady effort it took to bring it all crashing down. In early 2022, the case of Frankie Sinclair and Paul Fontaine reached the Old Bailey. But this wasn't just another gangland trial. It was the first time a UK jury would hear a full murder conspiracy case built almost entirely from encrypted phone evidence. The messages weren't vague. They were blunt, direct, and filled with details. Sourced guns, payment agreements, names, threats, all of it recorded on devices they thought were untouchable. The courtroom heard how Sinclair, using the handle Nude Train, planned the murder of a rival using weapons supplied by Fontaine, known on Encrochat as Usual Wolf. Prosecutors described the chat logs as pretty upfront and explicit, pointing out that neither man held anything back in their encrypted messages because they believed they were completely secure. Sinclair had argued the messages were just bravado, posturing, not planning, that he was venting, not organizing. Fontaine gave no evidence at all, declining to speak in his own defense. One expert witness from the National Crime Agency explained how the French-led hack had captured messages in real time, while another, called by the defense, questioned the reliability of the data due to the system's instability. But in the end, the jury was unconvinced. After more than 14 hours of deliberation, the verdict came down: guilty. Sinclair and Fontaine were convicted of conspiracy to murder, the first convictions of their kind in Britain, based solely on Encrochat messages. It was a landmark ruling, and it sent a clear message. Encrypted didn't mean invisible. Both men were handed life sentences, with a minimum of 18 years behind bars. For police, it marked the end of a 5-year chase. For the criminal world, it was a turning point, proof that conversations once thought safe were now evidence, played out in full before a jury. For decades, the criminal world had its own logic, brutal but governed by rules. Certain lines weren't crossed. Certain acts, no matter the beef, were off limits. Attacking someone's mother was one of them. But in more recent years, the rules seem to have been dropped, and now anything goes. Frankie Sinclair played the game the way it used to be played. He built himself on favors, fear, and presence. A man who moved smart, stayed just out of reach, and never let his name land on paper. But in the end, none of that mattered, because the system he thought protected him, the secrecy he believed he'd bought, turned on him. Messages he thought were gone forever were printed, time-stamped, and read aloud in court. Every threat, every order logged in plain English. Sinclair went down believing he played it right, but the streets had already changed, and by the time he realized, it was too late. You can run encrypted phones, you can use fake names, and you can source a pistol in London, price a body like a product. But one slip, one photo, and it all lands in court. That's the truth in this game. You don't just lose the war, you lose the myth. And this is how it all ends. Not in fire, not in glory. Just 4 walls, a case file, and your own words nailed to the evidence board. No empire, no legacy. Just a name on a charge sheet. A game run like business. And in the end, it never paid out. For more raw and real crime stories, hit the like button and subscribe. Until the next episode, stay alert and stay safe.